Thank you. I thank Senator Hutchison for her leadership, and I'm pleased to join her in this effort, and we have every intention of trying to pass this legislation in the very near future because it's essential to move forward. We are not any longer living under a moratorium in the Gulf of Mexico, but we're struggling to live under a permatorium. There has only been one lease issued, not even for new production, in almost a year in the deep water. Now, there are hundreds of companies that operate efficiently, effectively, honestly, transparently in the Gulf of Mexico. There was one bad actor, BP, and a handful of its contractors that are going to be found at fault for this accident. But what's happened, as it seems, is many of the other companies have been penalized for something that was not their fault. They weren't even in the area of this particular well, and I refer to shallow water drillers that were not even drilling in deep water, have been, for the most part, sidelined this entire year, as well as other deep water operators. So it's time to get our Gulf of Mexico back to work, particularly, as Senator Hutchison referred to, the turmoil going on in the Mideast. It's time for America to produce more of its own domestic resources. And it's time for this administration to be a better partner, a more helpful partner to the industry that only wants to do a good job, only wants to employ people, and only wants to produce the oil and gas that our country needs to try to keep this economic recovery underway. And that's basically what our LEASE Act says. This agency, BOEM, is right now understaffed and under-resourced to do the job that we're asking it to do, new regulations, etc. The last thing we want them to do is have to take the time they don't have, the resources they don't have, to review every lease to see whether it should be extended or not. This is a blanket extension, which makes perfect sense since there was sort of a blanket moratorium placed down on the industry, which was, in my view, uncalled for, and many experts agree. But this would be an automatic extension of 1 year of leases that were already in effect, thus cutting down on paperwork, cutting down on regulation, and giving time back that was taken away from these companies on really not very solid grounds. So we're going to work very hard to get this passed. It's just one of many things that need to be done. But again, it would help us get back on a more sure footing and better partnership with the many companies out there that had nothing to do with this bill, only want to get back to work and keep their people employed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? Or
Why did you decide to make it an extra year? Why that specific time frame?
it's not an extra year, it's giving them the year back that was taken from them. So the spill was in April 20th of last year. We're coming up on that date now. So we're not giving them an extra year. We're giving them the year back that was taken away from them.
The moratorium was May, so it's almost a year. And by the time we pass this, it will be a year.
Do you have any estimate of just how much production you might get by doing this by in a year? I mean, have the companies told you what might happen as a result of this?
Well, we know that the biggest reserve that we would have access to on American waters and soil is the Gulf, ANWR is the biggest, but the Gulf of Mexico is the second biggest. And we know that there are thousands out there who could be exploring, thousands, and yet they have been idled because though the moratorium was lifted, technically, in effect, it has not been lifted because there are no permits being given.
So really this is a matter of fairness, trying to find some area of fairness in all of this. But again, one company and its contractors caused this terrible explosion. All companies were penalized because of it. And 1 year has been basically taken away from them in leases that they've already paid for, that they budgeted for, accounted for to produce. So this legislation, I'm not even sure there should be any opposition to this. I mean, just from a common sense perspective, of course, there are people that don't think we should be doing any domestic production anywhere, and I expect them to be the same voices against this. But for anybody with common sense and reason, This is just extending leases that have already been paid for, the time that was taken away from them. We're asking for no special treatment in that regard, just give them the 5 years or 10 years that their lease, when they bid for the lease, when they paid the bonus for the lease, when they paid for the lease, it was paid for.
By the way, 13 rigs that were exploring left. They've gone overseas to do their work, and so those are thousands of jobs that have been lost in the Gulf of Mexico area.
And might I also add to that, I mean, some of the rigs that have left have been the most highly sophisticated and technical rigs because they're the newest to come on in the market. So when there was no place for them in the Gulf of Mexico, we're losing our better rigs in many cases to other countries. And the worst part about it is other countries, maybe with the exception of Norway and Great Britain, have less environmental regulations than we do. So from an environmental perspective, you're not making your situation better. You're actually making it worse. You're sending your better rigs, your more efficient rigs, away from American waters to places that have less regulations than we do. How is that protecting the oceans? None of this makes any sense to those of us on the Gulf Coast of either party. None of it.
Then
So
we have
one
to-
thing that we can do is give them an extension of their lease.
And we have to pay more to import the oil
Right.
that they get at a higher price.
Both of you talked about soaring gas prices lately. I think one thing though, right now, you've got these oil companies getting billions and billions of dollars in subsidies, basically tax breaks. At a time when they're raking in record high profits, why do they need that much help?
Go ahead. Well,
And then
let me
other-
say that the tax breaks that oil companies get are no different from any industry being able to write off its expenses. As I said, a company spends millions of dollars to drill, to explore first and then drill. Sometimes it's a dry well. Those should be able to be expensed like General Electric expenses their expensing. Their expenses their expenses. I mean, why wouldn't they be able to expense their G&G expensing, their exploration, their drilling expensing like any company? And secondly, what the administration has proposed, and unfortunately Harry Reid said yesterday that maybe we would take away these expensing items for just oil companies, not any other industries, and pay for the continuing resolution. That is treating the oil industry differently, raising the price of gas at the pump when any other company is able to expense what they spend to make a product. And secondly, if you take away the manufacturing tax credit on refineries, that is going to raise the price of gasoline for every individual who is using gasoline. Why wouldn't a refiner be considered a manufacturer? Those are not, in my opinion, in a bad economic climate with the thousands of jobs that are supported by the oil industry, is not the time to raise prices on the consumer, and most certainly not to penalize oil companies in a different way from every other industry that we hope to promote job growth in.
You talk about penalizing oil companies though, and the fact that we're in a recession. That doesn't seem to jive with the fact that right now they are making these massive profits that they've never seen before.
Well, I would only add, I agree with everything Senator Hutchison said. I think if you track the profits of oil and gas companies, they will fluctuate wildly. I know that I've lived along the Gulf Coast, now for almost, 5 decades, and there are times when companies go bankrupt. There are years where companies make no money whatsoever, and then there are times it's like feast or famine. Every time the companies start making money, people want to tax what they get, but when they're losing money, no one wants to help them because of this sort of anti-bias or this bias against oil and gas companies, which comes from some sectors of our democracy. It makes no sense to me. This industry employs 9.2 million people. It indirectly supports the general economy of the United States, and it shouldn't be singled out either for special treatment or for special penalty. So if a tax is levied across the board, then they should pay it. If not, they shouldn't be singled out. The second thing is, it's easy to say, well, Exxon should pay more, Shell should pay more. These are big internationals. But the companies that Senator Hutchison and I represent, I wouldn't necessarily say mom and pop because you've got to be substantial to drill. But they're small businesses relative. I mean, they employ 25 people, 50 people, 200 people, 600 people. These are not companies that you want to tax out of business. These are companies that you want to keep in business along the Gulf Coast, drilling either in shallow water, most of them, because they aren't big enough to drill in the deep water, or they're drilling in shallow onshore fields like the Haynesville Shale, actually creating millionaires monthly. We want to create more millionaires in America. We want to create more wealth in America. So you've got to be careful about continuing to pick on this industry every time somebody's looking for a dime around Washington, D.C.
I would just add one thing to everything that the senator has said, and that is that supply and demand has driven up the cost. It's the turmoil in the Middle East that has driven up the cost. The answer to that is more supply. It is to get these rigs drilling, get these rigs producing, have more capability for refinery capacity, and then the price will come down.
Is there a chance that that could happen in real time? And it sounds like there would be a race to get these rigs in operation before the turmoil in the Middle East settles down. I mean, is that a realistic answer to the price fluctuation we're seeing now?
Well, I think it is, because if we start a process that shows that we are drilling more, I think that's going to have an impact on the price immediately, because we will see that supply is coming. But secondly, I have to say that if we had done this, if we'd started exploring in Alaska, for instance, 10 years ago when we almost passed the bill in the Senate, we would be importing today, or we would be producing today out of Alaska the same amount that we import from Saudi Arabia every day. So I think we have to start planning. I think the fact that we will do it will make a difference, but I think the reality is that when these actually are able to come online, and some of them that we're drilling would be able to come online fairly quickly, then I think you would begin to see a real impact on the price. One more question.
Scheduling, you mentioned the desire, a need to move ahead with legislation as quickly as possible. Can you elaborate at all on what you think, the actual timeline might be, what the next steps are going to look like?
Well, I would hope, once we've introduced the bill, of course, we will push it, but the way things really happen in the Senate is through the amendment process, because so few bills actually get to the floor in a comprehensive way. Now, I do believe that we need to have another energy bill. I think that there are several things that we could be doing to increase our supply of energy of all kinds, as well as conservation measures. So I would look for that, of course, to put our amendment on. But I think before that, we will have the capability, hopefully, to have real appropriations bills going through the floor where we can add this amendment on. And I agree with Mary. I can't imagine someone opposing it. Or it would be very few people who would oppose just a fairness of giving people this added year that they have lost through no fault of their own.
Thank you.
Thank you.